right, Craig, how are you? Welcome to the Titans of Food Service podcast. Thank you so much for joining me here today.
Hey, Nick, thanks very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And again, the guests you had are amazing, and I'm just happy to be in that company.
I love it. I love it. So why don't we just jump right into it? And let's go back to the very beginning. How did you get into the food service industry?
Sure. I think similar to a lot of people, it started with the need for money, and the easiest way to get that in kind of high school and college oftentimes was walking through the back door of a restaurant.
Sure.
I did that. I bussed tables in high school. I had my own lawn mowing business, and that was actually better money. And I, uh, I think I bussed tables for about 4 days before I figured out that was really difficult. And I wasn't old enough to wait tables, so I didn't come back to that until college. But in college, I couldn't mow lawns, and so being a waiter was much better money. And basically, when you needed money, you could pick up additional shifts, and there was always somebody willing to give up their shift because they had something better to do. So I took advantage of
Sure.
that. Not really thinking it would be a career, quite honestly, but it was good money. And then as I was about to graduate, I kind of had a couple job opportunities. One was in sales, which I kind of had felt drawn to, and the other one was to be a manager of a Pizza Hut,
All
working
right.
for PepsiCo at the time. And as I told the story to all my friends, and certainly my mom and dad and relatives and everybody else, they kind of looked at me like, "What in the world? You're about to graduate. You've got a degree. What would you do that for?" And the story I would tell them was pretty simple. It's like I was in an entrepreneurship class with this guy who graduated with high honors, and he went to work for him. So surely there must be something to it. And the long story short is, after I got into it, there was a bunch of people that were sort of in my same position, and they were managing $1 and $2 and $3 million P&Ls at 22 years old, and they had 60
Sure.
employees and all these things. And I thought, wow, what a great way to get that experience early on. And I never really saw the lack of sort of glamour that's involved in managing a fast food restaurant. It wasn't until it was pointed out to me by my friends and girlfriend at the time, and different things, that I came home and I smelled like pizza,
Yep.
that I knew that anything was different other than running a million five business. And so that's kind of how I got into it. And then after a couple years of that, we were about to get married, and we sat down, my wife and I, or my future wife, and said, this is probably not going to be sustainable running an operations business, doing this for much longer. And the long term play was, in a year or two, I would get to run a territory that was, significantly larger, 10, 15, 20 stores. And I was fortunate at the time that somebody came and helped me. And the way that this gentleman helped me was, he said, "Craig, you're doing a great job. Really love what you're doing. And another 10 to 12 years of this, and you will be ready for the next level." And at that moment, I realized that's exactly what I needed. And I'm going to go do something different, because I can't do this for 10 to 12 more years. Or I don't think I'll end up getting married, and I certainly won't have a family. So yeah, then I looked at getting into something different in food service, and ultimately became a DSR, and was a DSR, and realized from there that I really wanted to be on the manufacturer side. And so a
Mhm.
couple years later, got a manufacturer role. But I think not an atypical story of how a lot of us get into food service, sort of through the service aspect of it, and that's been a fantastic experience for me throughout. I'm glad I did it. So.
Right. Who were you a DSR for?
At the time, it was White Swan, but they were just becoming U.S. Foods.
Okay,
So
nice.
that whole aggregation of companies, then they bought Sexton, and just at about that time is when I got the opportunity to move on to the manufacturer side. But yeah, it was U.S. Foods, and it was it was interesting. That was quite different in that you had freedom. You had a territory, and you called on restaurants, um, and what was interesting, being young and married, and not having a lot of money, is you developed friendships, and partly built
Mhm.
on who would feed you lunch,
Yep.
or something like that, because the money for the first couple years was not good. And that was another thing that kind of led me to, I think I need something a little more than commission based. to make this work. But yeah,
Right.
that's what I worked for.
And how long were you a DSR for?
2 years, but if I'm super honest, and this is nothing against DSRs, because I know a lot of them, and a lot of them are still my
Sure.
friends from way back when. It took me about 3 months to figure out that that was not the part of the food service business for me, and so
Yeah.
it took me about another 20 months to get onto the manufacturer side. But it was pretty evident from the get go that I had, I'd stepped out of operations, but I'd stepped into something different, and again, critical element of our industry vertical, but I really saw what sort of brokers and manufacturers did,
Hmm.
and that really appealed to me. I could relate to that, much more, and some of the brands that I'd gotten the opportunity to sell as a DSR were really compelling. The Campbell Soups of the world, the
Hmm.
Best Foods, the Hellmann's, a lot of those, the Hormels. There were just some really neat and unique things going on in the industry. And funny enough, one of the things I remember most about that time was about the time that the stealth fry came out,
Hmm.
which was coating on the fry that made it last longer, and that was this big innovation. And I thought, wow, how cool would it be to get into potatoes and do that, and obviously foreshadowing 20 years later. But anyway, so that was kind of my journey to that point. And then you know, I got um, I got the opportunity to go to work for a company called CPC at the time, Corn Products Corporation, which was the predecessor to Best Foods. And Best Foods was, and Corn Products was Argo and Caro and Hellman's and Knorr and all those things, and some really
Hmm.
great brands. And that was a unique experience in that you went out every day and you knew you had, for the most part, some of the best value and highest quality brands. And that was really neat. And as we transitioned out of sort of Argo and Caro, because those were really more commodity items, I really found my footing, and my
Sure.
passion, and what I was really good at selling, which was value and brands. And then that just kind of propelled me into the next stages of my career. So I think at that time, because food will be a central point of this whole journey, as it's been a central point of my life. What I loved
Sure.
about Best Foods at the time is we had these great frozen soups, and we had salad dressings, and all these, and these were, I would bring these things home, and my wife thought I was crazy because there was two of us, and we would have gallons of salad dressing, that were in our refrigerator that we could use, and save money, and it was really neat. And
Hmm.
so, but again, it was great products, and that was kind of the basis of which I really enjoyed what I did. So
Definitely.
yeah, and so then we kind of moved on from that, and Unilever acquired Best Foods, and that was my first, I guess, interesting element of change in the industry. And it was an interesting but scary time. And it was interesting because there was this corporate takeover situation that was
Hmm.
happening. It was right kind of around the time the dot-com sort of bust was happening and all that. My wife worked in technology, so we had experienced that. And so that for me was like, oh wow, this is happening in the food business. And through some very bizarre circumstances, ultimately the Unilever North American business became the driver of the food service business in North America. And actually, it was supposed to be the other way around, but there was some, like I said, some very unique circumstances that happened. And so, this large contingent of Unilever team came in, and a large contingent of Canadians, because they really had a phenomenal food service business. And that was my first exposure to a different culture. And not that Canada is a different culture, but a different business culture, right? And it was
Hmm.
just a different way of doing business and looking at things. And I was fortunate to be exposed to a lot of things, and many of which were scary, because I went from this um, expert sort of area manager and regional manager at what I was doing, to I knew nothing about the way that that Unilever was selling. Not and that was, for me, felt really scary, because again, I thought I was an expert, and then now all of a sudden I'm not. As I started to understand the culture of the way they did things more, ultimately that I was able to see the value in some of the things that they did, particularly working really closely with operators, and really trying to understand the tension that happens, in a business, in a restaurant, when labor's tight, or when products are a problem and all those kind of things. So that sort of took me into the next stage of my career. So,
And how long did you stay at Unilever for?
well, altogether with CPC, Best Foods, and Unilever, I
Mhm.
was there 21 years.
Wow.
And it's interesting because even then, again, being surrounded by sort of technology people that I was with my wife's friends and all of our friends, I thought 2, 3 years, 4 or 5 years would be a lifetime and those kind of things. And I was just fortunate to get to do a lot of different things over that period of time that made it interesting, that drove a lot of growth for me, and took us, gosh, all over the U.S. and ultimately internationally and back. And so there was just a lot of neat things that occurred in that 21 years. So yeah.
I'm sure. It sounds like you got a lot of experience. I mean, from when you started bussing tables to working at Pizza Hut to CPC Unilever, you learned so much. I mean, you even learned about, the Canadian way of doing business. When you look back on your time to where you are here today, is there somebody that helped you along the way, or did you have mentors or, yeah, someone who helped you along the way?
Sure, there's several. I mean, and I probably the biggest one for me actually occurred sort of mid-career, and that's when I went overseas. I worked out of the Netherlands for 4 years. So after we were acquired, I got to work in some global teams, and then took over the East Division of the U.S. And ultimately, because of my experience working on some global projects, I got the opportunity to go work on the global leadership team for customer development for Unilever. And so that was 4 years in the Netherlands, and most of that time, my manager was a gentleman named Robert Guillet, who actually runs a very large American food business in France, or an American sort of icon food business in France. But anyway, he really, and at the time I would be honest and say I didn't see him so much as a mentor as somebody that was really challenging, and in a very gracious sort of way. Robert was sort of like the father of food service globally for Unilever at the time, and nobody could outwork Robert. He was tireless, he was caring, he was passionate. But one of the things that Robert really challenged and taught me was the idea of simplicity.
Mhm.
I can still hear him. You have to make things extremely simple, and that's important anywhere. But in an organization where you've got 2,500 selling people spread across the globe, it's even more important. How you translate that language wise is one thing, but how you make the message very simple is an entirely different thing, and that really sticks with me today. The other element, and it's built on simplicity, but communication, and you always, I think, as the leader, have to look at how your message is being received, and then first point the finger at yourself to say, is there something I did or didn't say, or a way that I should have communicated that the message would have been received better? And certainly when you're in a position of authority, I mean, it's easy to say, well, you didn't listen, and I just think that's the wrong approach. And I think Robert modeled that really well, which is, we would have these meetings after we would go all over the globe and launch different initiatives, and we would sit down afterwards and talk about what went right and wrong, and most of it was what went wrong, and how do we make it better. And so I learned that, that simplicity piece, but also then the simplicity in communication was just key. And so, I'll always remember that from Robert. And then the second thing was, or the third thing, I guess, was really around um, just the art of negotiation, and not negotiation in terms of the win-loss piece, or you gain business or you lose business, but just the amount of work and preparation and scenario modeling and worst case scenario, and all these kinds of things, and approaching it from so many different ways. And so what that brought for me was this whole idea of diversity of thought. You hear
Mhm.
diversity quite a bit, and it's a buzzword in all the good and bad ways. But what really I got the opportunity with a company like Unilever, other big multinationals, is diversity was evident in the business. You just look at the nationalities I worked with in Rotterdam for 4 years, and it was everything you can imagine, right? And so what was cool about that was just it was always neat to see the different ways people, looked at things. And so as I look at diversity today, and it's in a much different way because of where we are and the company we are, it's always about making sure you have the sharpest plan, the sharpest strategy, the sharpest message. But you can only do that if you've had lots of people from diverse points of view helping you through that. Because otherwise, it's amazing how homogenous things become. When you've got a team that's not diverse. So
Absolutely. After your 4 years in the Netherlands with Robert, how did you come back to the United States? What did that look like?
So that was an interesting point, and kind of an inflection point in my career. As when you go on an expat assignment, typically companies say, we guarantee you'll come back, we don't guarantee you a role. And
Right.
so kind of going back to that scenario modeling, we said, what's the worst case scenario for us as a family? There's not a role when I come back, but we've done had this fantastic experience as a family, and that proved to be the case. But as I was looking for my role coming back, ultimately one surfaced. But it was at that point I started to think, well, should I be looking outside of Unilever? And it wasn't because anything wrong with Unilever. It was more I'd had the opportunity and the privilege, but also the challenge of having discussions with people that were more senior in their career than I
Mhm.
was over time. And a lot of those discussions revolved around people that just wanted to do the job they'd done, but they hadn't continued to grow their skill set. And as we all know, the job you do today requires something different tomorrow than it did yesterday. And even at your age, if you're not a different person next year, you're not
Right.
going to be as successful as you were. And so
Right.
I looked at that and said, I love what I do. I love the company. I love the people, but I don't know that there's a path for me, and there's not a path for me to continue to grow. There's probably a path for me to continue to work here, but can I be excited about that? Can I add value? Can I grow personally? And ultimately, I got a job, and I came back here, and it was a great another 5 years when I came back. But it was at
Mhm.
that point the seed was planted that I needed to think about how I would continue to grow and add value wherever I was in the organization. And so that continued on until 2017 when I ultimately left Unilever. So
Sure.
yeah,
When you left in 2017, is Idahoan the next stop that you made?
it is. It is.
Yeah.
Very fortunate again to work for a large company. And one of the things I'd seen in Europe was this whole. In fact, I saw one posted on LinkedIn today. This idea of a sabbatical. And I'm like,
Sure.
as an American, you're like, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
Like what is that? I mean, I've heard the term, but I thought that was just professors, right? And so that always intrigued me, not because I didn't want to work, but I was like, wow, how cool would it be to just take a step back for a little bit? And so kind of 2015, there started to be some things happening in the
Mhm.
organization of Unilever. I knew that the time was coming. And so we were prepared for it, but Unilever also just does a phenomenal job of taking care of their people. And they understand that people really are the only sustainable advantage. And so I was fortunate when I left to have a really good exit, package. And, I sat down and talked to my wife and said, I'm going to take 100 days off. I'm not going to do anything.
Wow.
And I again kind of going back to the scenario planning. You say I know what the worst case scenario is. I mean, not
Mhm.
worst, but I can go get a job as a sales leader in a lot of different companies. I've got a lot of value to add, but I don't know that that's what I want to do. And if
Mhm.
I don't stop, for a little bit and think about it, I won't know. And so, very glamorous, taking 100 days off in the dead of winter in Chicago. We went on a lot of very icy cold walks, around our little local park, but it was great. I really enjoyed that, time, and it was, yeah, it was pivotal. And then, after 100 days, I started searching, and ultimately, as often is the case, a very old connection who I knew in Dallas when I was a DSR and a sales rep, called me up one day, and we were talking about an opportunity, and I'm like, yeah, I don't think that one's going to work out. It's like, yeah, you're probably right. He's like, you ever thought about moving to Idaho? And I thought, I've lived in a lot of places, and not everyone would I move back to, but every one of them has been, interesting, and has presented us as a family and me as a person with new challenges. And so kind of started talking, and ultimately that led, a couple months later to the job I have now at Idahoan, which is, leading the food service business and on the executive team. And it's been a great ride. You know, I'd done some homework, and I thought about private equity, and I'd interviewed with a few companies that, were private equity held. And I had some friends that were, doing very well in private equity. I can't say that that's not the right place for me. It just, nothing ever worked out. And now, upon kind of hindsight, I'm glad that it didn't.
Right.
We're a privately held company, and there's challenges there too, but there's a lot of opportunity that I have on this side of the business. One in particular is, there's just a long-term view of the business,
Mhm.
and we get to do a lot of things, that are based in the long-term value we're creating for the company. And I'll give you an example. When COVID hit, I came in to fix the business, and get it to being a performing part of Idaho. And overall, our retail business is one of the top success stories in branded food in the last 20 years. I mean, you can go
Mhm.
check that. It's unbelievable. And we really needed a second growth vehicle. And so I came in to do that. And when COVID hit, obviously, there was a little bit of an inflection point there. And the good news is we had a couple year track record of doing some good things. And I went to the board, and I said, look, here's what a typical large company with a lot of line items would do, and we can do that. And I've got experience doing that. It's not fun. And we'll take care of people, but I don't think that's the right thing for the business in the long term. Or here's what I promise you we will do. I said, we will get together as a team. We will do things we've never done before.
Mhm.
We will develop ourselves as individuals, as people. Will uncover every rock. And when we come out of the pandemic, we will exit faster than anybody else. And they said, you know what? We believe you've got a good team. So yeah, just manage the business. Don't, don't erode any more value, but make sure you're adding value when you came out. And we've done a great job, and we've been beating the market, basically ever since.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's been so that's been really gratifying, to when you can put out a real business case, and you're just a couple layers removed from the owners of the company, and they can look you in the eye and say, yeah, go for it. So
Absolutely. Yeah, that's got to feel good. When you approach your board, what are some of the things that when you're building out your strategy, what are some of the things that you look at and build into the strategy?
sure. It's interesting. Our business is a single category, right? We're in potatoes, and we call fresh dried potatoes because they're a unique technology. And that's quite different, than selling 10 or 15 brands with a breadth of portfolio.
Mhm.
And so for us, innovation is reasonably focused around, potatoes, and the formats you can deliver in the way that we have. And so it's really about helping the board understand where the opportunity is. And now there's even more opportunity than ever, at least in our product format and category, because of all the labor challenges and everything else. And so I actually heard, I listened to one of the podcasts, and somebody was talking about explaining food service, to people. And I'll have to
Mhm.
send you a diagram. I have this great diagram that I got from a consultant, and I'll have to give him credit at some point. I can't remember where it was, but it's basically just a spider web that describes food service,
Sure.
right? I mean, you got GPOs and buying groups, and it's so true that you have to explain that almost on a daily basis to
Mhm.
companies that are retail led. And it's not because they don't want to understand it. It's just because their route to market is very clear and very direct. And,
Right.
and food service isn't that way. And so a lot of what we do is try to help them understand the value we're adding, oftentimes is in a more efficient route to market or go to market, to get to the ultimate user, which is the operator. And so that's what a lot of our strategy development looks like. And I love it. I mean, it's great because there are, going back to the whole idea of being a privately held company. I mean, the systems that we've invested in to give us data that really nobody else has, at least in
Mm,
my experience in food service, has been critical. Because that, and when you're from a retail mindset, you look at things in category management and everything is known and all those kind of things. And, we're not there in food service, but we're certainly approaching, a pretty critical moment where we've got, we know more than we don't know, by a significant margin. And that's important. So a lot of my time with the board is spent talking about that. I've got to be careful on two fronts. I've got to be careful that I bring and I hire in talent that has large company, sort of process and development, but that we don't weigh down our current company with all that unnecessary process, right? And because
mhm.
process tends to breed process. And so going back to the simplicity thing is really important. The other thing we've got to be really careful of is, we are who we are. We're Idahoan. That implies a lot of things, besides just the fact that we're in Idaho. We are a potato company, and it doesn't mean that never will we not do XYZ, but we've also got to be really smart, and think about that. And I think a lot of people get out over their skis and chase kind of the shiny light. So it's kind of that balance,
Sure.
of not doing that. So
I have so many questions. I mean, you've got just some great nuggets here. Let's go back to, so you said when you bring in people that you're looking for people who have potentially big company experience. What do you mean by that? And what does that look like when somebody has big company experience?
well, and maybe that's so to come back. It's people, like I said earlier, I think people are the only sustainable advantage, right? And so,
Mhm.
you've got to make sure that you have a mix of experience, and we have a wealth of smaller company, experience in our company. And so you've got to be really choiceful about bringing in people with, diverse skill sets or unique skill sets that you wouldn't naturally find, here in the building. We're located in Idaho Falls, Idaho, which is, on the eastern side of Idaho. It's a town of it's a metro area of probably about 150,000. And so there's some great things about that. But for example, there's not a whole lot of food service marketeers in Idaho Falls. Just not the case. Chicago, yes, Denver, yes, et cetera. And so when you're looking to bring in, bigger company experience is kind of the word that I used. It's really about somebody who's seen big process and who's seen, all the advantages that category and customer channel management, have in the Kellogg's and Unilever and P&G world, but then be able to also see how do I apply that in a
Mhm.
much smaller microcosm, and it can be done. So you're kind of looking for a balance of somebody that has that experience, but also is excited about doing things, differently, and applying that. One of the things we talk about a lot is the concept of the fishbowl, right?
Uh-huh.
Goldfish only grow as large as their fishbowl. There's all sorts of analogies, and I'll get all of them wrong. But at the end of the day, we all operate in sort of this, environment that's somebody else or the external has painted for us. And so one of the things we talk about is, we are not the fishbowl of large CPG where 4 to 6% growth is good. 6% is a great year, and not because that's not good, it's because it doesn't have to be good. We, especially in where we are today, we have so much more potential than that. And if we lock ourselves into the sort of fishbowl of, you know, the typical food service growth, well, then we would be growing at 4 or 5%. What that's the industry growth projection this year, right? And that's dollars,
Right.
that's not pounds, right? So
Right.
that's not real. So we talk about trying to find the right balance of somebody who has that experience, but also then is ready to kind of break out of the chains and apply it in a different way. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
Yeah,
hopefully
no,
so.
it totally did. When you're when you're building the Idahoan food service arm, is it more important to you to find the right person, or is it more important to have the right system for that person to come in and be successful in?
Yes, both. Culture isn't a plug and play thing, right? If
Mhm.
you're trying to maintain a culture, right, a culture of excellence, whatever you want to call it, and you're just adding what you have today, then you're already kind of on the way down, right? You're already sort of, you've heard the expression, if you're green, you're growing, if you're ripe, you're rotten, right? And so you're looking for that skill set, but you're also wanting that to be additive in terms of the systems that you have, and take away computer systems, but just the way you approach things. And so, look, I think I've got some good ideas from years of doing things the way I've done them, but I also have a group of really bright people who are challenging me on a constant basis. Why? And it's
Hmm.
not just newer people in the organization. I need all of my people and my team to challenge me, because my knowledge is based on what it's been. And yes, I get new experience as well, but you need that challenge. And so the people are really, really important, but they're important because the skill set they bring in, also the additive nature to the culture, or the even the multiplicative nature to the culture. And then in terms of systems are just an enabler.
Hmm.
And we have a great system here, but more importantly, we have a great person that's in charge of taking that system and making sure that everything we do to it, everything we add to it, everything we take away from it, because we do a lot of that too, makes it easier for our team to execute. I had the privilege, scars, whatever you want to call them, to in my last role with Unilever, to roll out a massive CRM system. And it's a story of a typical sort of large company challenge, right? All the right intent, all the right people, all the right investment, all those things. And ultimately it failed because it got so disconnected from reality of what we needed. And fortunately, unfortunately, I haven't been there to see. I understand it's working better today, but it was way over engineered for what it needed to be, and ultimately for many years caused a lot of work that was just work, and wasn't really around execution. So when we came here and said, what do we want to do? We said, well, first of all, we're going to make sure that every single day the system serves the strategy, and the strategy serve the people to make the execution easier. And so again, a little bit of a roundabout answer, but systems are important, but systems are just enablers,
Sure.
but they can certainly be massive detractors if you don't get them right. So
Yeah, definitely. I notice, I have friends outside of the food service industry who are entrepreneurs or on their own business. And a lot of times people, I think they prioritize finding the right people, but they don't necessarily have the right system for when those people come in. And then those people have just way too much latitude, or maybe too much, they don't have enough direction or whatever it may be. And those people kind of get lost. And then are you really moving the ball down the field? You mentioned that you have a person that's in charge of systems. What is kind of their role and responsibilities on let's just say a daily basis?
sure. And let me tag on to what you said before I answer that question, because
Yeah.
I think you're also using systems in terms of sort of strategy, right? And how we
Hmm.
execute it. And that's one thing I think we've done really well, going back to simplicity. We have a very simple focus, primarily on the operator. We have great distributor partners that we have a lot of resource around, but at the end of the day, our selling arm is really focused on operators. And so everything we do is about that singular message, and there's some parameters within that, but it's really, really system oriented in that way. And then to answer your question, I had a function in my previous role at Unilever called business excellence, and I actually was in a role like that early on when I first moved to Chicago, called sales operations, which is what most people call that role. And one of the things I realized in that role was it became this behemoth that was self-serving, right? Going back to the whole idea of you add process, which then adds more process, which requires more. And so one of the things we were able to do, and quite honestly, why I got the job, is I pitched the idea of why do we need 20 people in this department when maybe 3 or 4 will do? Redeploy the 20 somewhere else. And so from that time, it's always been about sales operations. Never felt right. It was more about sales enablement. And ultimately, we started to call it business excellence, because what business excellence does is make sure that the internal workings of the organization, whether it be systems, processes, all those kinds of things, again, serve our sales team so that they can be more efficient and more effective. And so Brandy, who runs, business excellence for us, I mean, she really is tasked with looking at our system and how do we make it better, and how do we make it simpler, and how do we make it easier, and how do we make it, quite honestly, more encompassing. One of the things I learned, in the rollout of that massive system was if you call it CRM, that's what it's going to be. And it's only ever going to be that. And so we really started to use the idea around business system, because when we implemented the CRM element of it, it was never for just that part. It was going to be the basis of a trade system and a tracking system and an engagement system and a campaign system. And now today it's all of those things. And we still have miles to go. But it's one singular system, and it's called, we call it the food service business system. We actually named it Spud Hub, so that's actually one of our team named it Spud Hub. So that's how integral it is to what we do. But that's what Brandy's role is, and that's what business excellence role is to make sure that nothing we're doing internally is causing our team to slip up. Now, let me be honest. Not everybody loves systems. Not every salesperson loves systems. There's all flavors and stripes of us, right? And so, her job also, even though she wouldn't want to admit it, is also a sales job, right? She's a champion of the system, and we spend a lot of time trying to help people understand how it'll be easier. One of the decisions we made early on was this will be a system that people can use on laptops, they can use on a mobile device, whether it's an iPad or it's a phone, and it will have just as much functionality all the way across. And what's funny is, and I would have never picked this, the people that use it on their phones are absolutely not the people that I would have thought. The people that use it on their computers are not the ones, and the people that use it on their iPads. So, but they all use it. And so that's great. So
I love that. And, looking at, I've seen some of your sales presentations, the way you train your sales team, it's in a way almost formulaic. So whether you're standing in San Francisco or, in New York, your sales team has the same tools and the similar type message to be successful. And I think that goes a long way, especially when you're dealing with, your own direct sales team, and then also broker networks where, you may have hundreds of people that are outselling on your behalf at any given time.
absolutely.
You mentioned that investments, you make these investments in these systems, and then those systems in return give you data. What is some of the data that you look at to make decisions?
Sure. I mean, ultimately, the most important data, it's no different than would it be in a retail environment. The more I know about the person that uses our product, the better off, the more successful we're ultimately going to be. And so for us, it's all around end user data, operator data. And we work really hard with our distributor partners and our corporate partners, our GPO partners, to make sure we have access to that, so that we can deploy our resources in the most efficient way. Of course, it informs innovation and all those kinds of things, but ultimately, we're trying to spot patterns of usage or non-usage or voids. And one of the things I think that's been an unlock for us is we have to be consistent in the way we treat and access and manage that data over time. I think another challenge when you work in larger environments is, there's new leadership or there's new direction or whatever, and it comes in and it never comes in at the right time. And so you're constantly reinventing something. And, look, we rolled out CRM, our CRM system, 4 months after I arrived here. We didn't roll out another piece of that business for another 2 years. And then we implemented trade. And then we didn't really roll out anything else major. In fact, we haven't rolled out anything else major beyond that, other than small enhancements. And so while the data you're after is important, the way you treat it and look at it consistently over time is just as, if not more important, because otherwise it becomes kind of the flavor of the month. And again, that happens a lot. And then you never really get to the value of the basic data you have. I'm shocked still at the amount of data that companies purchase, and we try to be really focused and purchase very, very limited data. Not because it's not all good. I mean, I can name all the companies, and they all do a great job. I just use it all, and that takes away from investment I can make in other places. So,
Sure. Now that we're here in 2023, there's still COVID going on a little bit, but it's not to the degree, obviously, it was in 2020. What are some of the goals that you're pursuing now here today?
Sure. I mean, we're fortunate again in that the type of product we have, sort of in that speed scratch environment, those kind of things really resonates, more and more. And there's systemic change in the restaurant business coming out of COVID, right? And it will forever, alter, or not alter. It already has. It's changed the trajectory of food service, and so we just have to be really, really sharp and simple in our message about evangelizing that opportunity with our type of product. And what we're constantly, encouraged by is, just the reaction we get on the quality that it is, which is great. Again, I wouldn't be here going back to my very earliest comment around selling quality. But of course, there's some perceptions around, different things. I think operators obviously had to be much more open to a lot of different things. We all did during COVID, so that's helped. But it's really just carrying that message, and just being sharper on execution. One of the coolest things that I've gotten to do in 5 years is to execute the same strategy and sharpen it every year,
Mhm.
and really look out into the future and go, all we have to do is be smart enough to look at ourselves from an external, viewpoint, but just keep sharpening this strategy. And so far, I haven't seen anything that would radically alter what we do. And that's been, and what a blessing that is, because you just don't, often get that in other environments. And so, really, Nick, it's just continuing to be better and better and better. I mean, growth presents opportunity, but it presents challenge as well. And so as we get bigger, we have to kind of think about what we would do differently, or would we add resource and how and where. But those are, those won't take us away from our core kind of responsibility and how we execute. So
Sure. You mentioned that, you always have a drive and want to continue to grow your skill set. Since you joined Idahoan back in 2017, what is maybe a new belief, behavior, or habit that has most improved your business acumen?
sure, I think probably the thing, and this may have to do with age a little bit as well, and it's in a good and bad way, is I've had to be, more open to my own shortcomings, right? And not that I haven't believed. I mean, we all have a little bit of pride and those kind of things, but recognizing, when I say shortcomings, it's also, I don't have knowledge in areas of certain things, and that others do. And that's not just an age thing. Again, that goes back to the diversity of thought piece. And so really being, much more open, and even seeking out, and making sure I'm staying attuned. And maybe if it's not me personally, having a team member come present about something, that they believe or understand, and that would be a blind spot for me. The other thing I would say that, and again, maybe it's because I'm aging, but the whole authenticity piece, I've seen. I mean, I don't think I've ever been one really to be somebody other than who I am. It was, I even took a little bit of pride in being the only Texan in the office in Rotterdam, so that was kind of fun. But I've always been sort of an open book, but I've also seen that pay a lot of dividends, and particularly in COVID, and when you've got to, look a team in the eye and say, guys, I have no idea what's going to happen, and I don't even know if our, company will exist, or certainly not our company, but our side of the company. And I know, in your shoes, and many others, that was a common discussion. But it also, I think, built that trust, and
Mhm.
just kind of doubles down on the whole idea of authenticity, and that being an important piece. I think the other thing is again, and this is why I ultimately made the decision, in 2017, well, not decision, but left Unilever in 2017, and then moved to Idaho in 2018, was I've got to keep growing and doing different things. So there's initiatives I'm working on now, within Idahoan, that I've never thought I would have been working on before. Some cool different, whether it's innovation, or whether it's working with our, our larger corporate entity, just some stuff that I haven't gotten to be exposed to. And I'm closer to supply chain and finance than I've ever been in my career. And those are not backgrounds of mine. And so that's been a really great learning as well. So just, I mean, every day is still a learning curve. I'd say the other thing, kind of as the cap, and that's important, is, and I'm learning this too, is as your career evolves, and as your, family dynamic evolves, you also evolve, right? And so, some of the things I'm learning now, are on a family perspective and how that, how that's changing as well as my kids get up and get out of the workforce. Those are fun conversations to talk to my kids that are in the workforce. But then there's other things too, just about the relationship that I have with my family. And so again, I think that I've always been a person that has felt like, and it's, always a balance you're working on, but all of it's got to be in balance or none of it's in balance.
Yeah.
And so, that's a constant.
When you look back on your career, going back to, your early days of bussing tables, is there anything that you would do over or do differently?
Probably would have studied more in college. That I'm sure a number of people will chuckle at that one. I don't know. I mean, I've never been one to dwell on the past. I'm pretty resilient in the fact that I can see what happened if it's good, bad, or whatever, and I can move on to the next piece. So I think resilience is really important. There's a lot of things that are out of your control, and no matter where you are, what level you're at. I mean, who would want to be in, the CEO of Cisco US Foods when COVID happened, right? I mean, it doesn't matter,
Mhm.
right? So there's lots of stuff that's out of your control. So to the extent that you can not worry about that, that will make you better, and help you to grow faster and take care of your team and your people and your company better. So I don't know that I would do that differently. But I think that's really important. There's a good story that's there that really brought this home for me. So I love the fact that people think I'm this successful. Ultimately, I came through sales and have done many things since then. But people think I'm this great salesperson, and
Mhm.
I love to tell the story about my first true sales job, that I got fired from. And what's even better about that is, it was selling books door to door one summer, and it's a straight commission job. So how many people do you know that get fired from a straight commission job? Um, and what was interesting about that, and the great story there is that I wasn't going to quit. There was no way I was going to quit, even though I had sold one thing, working 10 hours or 12 hours a day, 6 days a week in like 8 weeks, one, and that was actually returned. So I'd sold nothing. And my manager came to me and said, "Craig, you're a great guy. You're not going to be successful at this." And he said, "And that's okay." He said, "But you're the kind of guy that's going to continue to bang your head against the wall. But every time you walk up to the door, you're not making a sale and you're not going to make one." And he said, "Go home. I mean, you're going to be successful at something else. I know you are." And I'm like,
Yeah,
"Okay, whatever. You just don't want to have any more conversations with me." And the reason I tell that story is, and I told the story a lot, so anybody who hears this will recognize that story, is a couple things. Not all of us are in the right role at the right time with the right product, and that's okay.
mhm,
And as leaders, we have a huge responsibility to have those conversations sometime, because a lot of times that lack of perfect sort of circle doesn't exist, and it won't in the current role that that person is in. And if you as a leader aren't courageous enough to have that conversation, you're just perpetuating a problem for your company, but for that person as well. And
mhm.
so that taught me a lot. And even though I was the recipient of that tough conversation, I would say that and a couple other things that happened early in my career helped me really understand that I'm not having this tough conversation because I'm a tough guy and all that. I'm having it because it's the
Mhm.
right thing to do. And ultimately, I believe truly in my heart of hearts that it will help, whoever's on the other side of that to get to a better place, whether it's with this company or, with another company. And, by and large, it's funny. There's a couple people I know that are wildly successful in other areas that just wasn't the right spot for them when they were with, whoever. So.
Totally. And what advice would you give to a smart, driven college student about to enter into the quote unquote the real world?
In food service specifically, or anywhere.
Just
And I've
just
given
in general, just from your
well,
experience.
I've given that to two sons now at this point, and hopefully they'll do okay. I would say learn as much as you can early on. That if there was something I would do different, I guess, going back to your earlier question, I would have put myself in a position to be in more of a sort of a generalist role in a large company, because you learn so many things, whether it's a consultancy or, a large FMCG company or bank or whatever. I think you just get to be exposed to so many more things. And so, you should really be after knowledge is one thing. But the other thing is, I really think I benefited a huge amount by having a leadership role right out of college. 60 employees, most of whom, very, again, QSR environment, right? But having to deal with all those problems that weren't my own did two things. It took the focus off me because I had to really understand what their problems were, and they're vastly different than mine. And I had to be able to talk to them about it. And so, managing those types of situations early on, I think is really, really important because and I don't fault people that are in individual contributor roles because I think those are huge. But if you want to be in a leadership role, I mean, you have a massive responsibility and opportunity to really multiply, your impact. And so the quicker you can get those kinds of experiences, and by the way, there's lots of scars that go with them.
Mhm.
They're definitely fun and sometimes ugly. You're just a better person for it, right? I mean, those life scars and those work scars are really, really important. So.
Definitely. I remember when I when I first came out of college, and my dad and I, we started our company together, and I was sitting there sending emails and text messages, trying to get appointments to go sell what we had at the time. And he's like, one thing they don't teach you in college is how to talk to adults. You got to pick up the phone. You got to get out there face to face. That's the only way you're going to learn. And it's kind of similar to maybe what you're saying a little bit, especially when it comes to a leadership role. You got to be, it's almost becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable,
Yep.
and learning and soaking up as much as you can, and definitely having your bumps and bruises along the way.
Absolutely. Well said.
Looking far into the future, when you reflect back on your career, what is, or even your personal life, what is something that you want to be remembered for?
You know, I want to be remembered first as a great husband and a fantastic father. You know, I have certainly got bumps and bruises and still accumulating, from the mistakes I made, but and have made. But that's what I want to be known for first. And I hope by extension of that, there's an authenticity that people will have seen around my leadership, and that hopefully somewhere somebody will have benefited from that, and not just personally, but then that they could impact other people. And there's just so many great leaders that you can see and learn from. But there's this whole host of people that are managing teams of 5 and 10 and 20, and in mid-level and even senior roles that you never hear about. And those are the operational people that are truly impacting lots of lives because they're close in proximity on a daily basis. So I hope by virtue of my journey that I've been able to do that as well. So.
That's great. It's kind of funny, when I started this podcast journey, if you will, I wanted to help others in the food service industry, but I didn't realize the amount of self-discovery and self-learning that I'd learned through doing these conversations. And I just have to say that in this hour or however long conversation we've had, I've learned a lot. And there's so many pertinent nuggets that you gave today. So I really appreciate you joining me here on the podcast. And, maybe we'll do it again in the future. And again, thank you so much for being an open book. And I think you had just incredible feedback and nuggets today. So thank you so much.
Nick, thanks for having me, and thanks for doing what you're doing. It's
Of course.
great to see this, and I'm looking forward to continue to learn from your subsequent guests. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Craig.